Good morning, gearheads. Welcome to Speed City F1 ahead of the Qatar Grand Prix. This is Jon Massengale in the studio in Austin, Texas, joined by Jonathan Green. Bob Varsha is under the weather and is not going to be joining us. Get well, Bob. Chris Medland will be joining us from the Lusail International Circuit here with his microphone here in just a few minutes. Good morning, Mr. Green. How are you feeling today?
I'm okay. I'm ready for Qatar. I'm ready for the flip-flop at the front, which is weird, but we did have our spidey sense right yesterday.
Yes, that's true. Max Verstappen has an unusual one-place grid penalty after driving unnecessarily slow. And we're going to get into this because there's actually more to this than just meets the eye. But I just want to prep the show here today, prep the race, because you know, this race, here we are, Jonathan, we're at the 23rd out of 24 races. Hard to believe that it's been this crazy long season. But, and it's funny, Bob is not feeling well from, he wasn't feeling well in Vegas. You're actually a little bit under the weather yourself. And this season is taking a toll. George Russell's talked about how this season has taken a toll on the drivers and the teams.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been a long season, and of course Max has wrapped up the championship, but the Constructors' Championship is still up for grabs, with McLaren leading the way there, with Ferrari, close. And after a good sprint from the McLaren team, the McLaren is in the driver's seat for the Constructors, but it's certainly not wrapped up by any stretch. Today is going to make a big difference on that, depending on how this plays out.
And then you've got that battle for six, which is raging, 6 points between three teams.
That's right. That's actually what I was going to lead up to. That's one of the most interesting battles left, when you've got Haas, RB, and Alpine, not in that order, actually, Haas, Alpine, and RB in that order, and the Haas team has come on strong again after, having a really nice, steady season. Of course, Alpine with that double podium, just amazing back in Brazil. So really interesting battle there. But I want to talk about the race here, because we're used to coming here at a different time of year when it's hot, but it's not hot here. It's cool, and the conditions are so different from the last time because, for one, the curbs have changed, besides the temperature, but the curbs have changed. And last year, 3 stops were mandated because of the curbs, the way the curbs were actually damaging the tires. There was a curb limit, but now we've had a gravel strip added at 7 different turns around the track. My question is, I wonder why they didn't do this sooner.
One of the reasons is it's predominantly a bike circuit, and what I mean by that is Lusail opened as a World Superbike circuit, then MotoGP came, and so it wasn't until recently that it started getting used as a car and bike circuit. It also hosts rounds of the UAE Formula 4 and Formula Regional Championship, which starts in January. So I think that there was a combination change of adapting for both. So I think that's part of it. But that's a very good question. Why didn't they do it earlier?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's I think the gravel traps. Now let's jump onto that, because I think that's a great idea. I think that. You mentioned a really good thought yesterday about having them added at COTA, but yeah. I just think it's such a simple idea, right? You eliminate all the insanity of a bunch of different track limits, violations, and all the craziness of all that. It takes care of itself.
Yeah. And I like the way they've done it too. That they are simple, small, not giant gravel traps, and they are literally there to stop you making track limit problems. So and we've seen it when you because there's some very fast corners here, so when you make that mistake and go wide, the jeopardy is real.
Yeah, speaking of fast corners, there's only one corner at less than 60 miles an hour at this circuit. That's pretty unusual. Only one corner that's that slow. So, and also we've got winds to contend with. We saw a couple of things during the weekend so far that I never heard drivers say for sure, but just some strange errors that look like that could have been caused by the winds.
Yeah, you're right by the sea. You're about a mile from the sea there, and generally it's pretty calm, but if the wind does get up, it's the desert, it's flat, so you know big time that it's coming, and it comes right across the track, which again is very flat. So you're going to notice it perhaps a little bit more than you would at a regular circuit.
Yeah, and well, let's go ahead and let's talk about the sprint also. We'll get into qualifying. We'll run down the grid later in the show, let everybody get up and run and get their cup of coffee going. But I want to talk about the sprint race because of what I alluded to at the top of the show. You had a 1-2 finish with Piastri and Norris for McLaren. So nice points. You get, Piastri got 8 points. Norris got 7 points for that sprint result there. So 15 points. Of course, Ferrari had also a good showing in 4th and 5th. So they moved up in the point standings as well. But to me, this kind of played out sort of like I was expecting this weekend. I was thinking this track might favor McLaren and Red Bull and maybe even Mercedes. So I was a little surprised to see Max down in 8th. But I don't know. What did you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, I like I said, I could go on a rant about the sprint race. I'm not a fan, but yeah, it kind of finished, except for the switcheroo at the end. It kind of finished as per form, but even McLaren aren't counting their chickens, as it were. I think that result doesn't really show the form guide. Ferrari need to do better. We thought they would be more competitive. We knew McLaren would be good, but they're not overly confident coming into this. But Red Bull definitely not as strong as they've been in other places, despite the fact that Verstappen got the pole. I think the evidence is more in the sprint race as to where their form guide is.
Well, I hear Chris Medland's microphone lighting up. I know he was over there at the Formula 2 press conference. Chris, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much for asking. And apologies for being slightly late to the show. But yeah, I host the Formula 2 press conferences with the top 3 finishers. And the top 3 that finished today are the 3 that are going to go and fight for the title next weekend. And the top 2 are potentially going to be on the F1 grid next year, but they're separated by just half a point going into next weekend. So there's a lot of questions for them. Gabriel Bortoleto, the future Stake/Audi driver, is leading by half a point from Isaac Hadjar, who could end up with a seat at RB if we get certain permutations.
Yep.
Yeah, half a point. Wow. Okay, that's close. Well, Chris, we were just chatting about. We talked about the circuit and the wind and the temperature and the gravel traps and all that and all the differences. But we're also talking about the Constructors' Championship, how we've got McLaren in the lead with Ferrari trying to chase them down, and of course the position for 6th with Haas, Alpine, and RB. But let's talk about the track. Let me get your take since you're there. What's the temperature like? What's the wind? Also, I want to know that too.
But both not what you'd be hoping for, to be honest. It's quite cold. I've actually got the thick jacket on that I had on the grid in Las Vegas, where everyone was obviously prepared for low temperatures. Well, you need the same setup here in Qatar, which was unexpected. But at least I still had the jacket with me because of this trip. So I'm grateful for Vegas forecasts for that one. But the wind is higher as well. It was really breezy coming in today. Really noticed it actually walking into the track earlier today, and it may well start to settle down slightly as we hit evening, but you can feel it even here in the paddock as I walk straight down the middle of it. And this is meant to be sheltered on either side. So I'm looking at some flags that I can see behind the paddock, and they're really pinned. So once I get out onto the grid, I think I'm going to feel it even more. And that could create some issues because we did see quite a few incidents in that Formula 2 race that I was doing the press conference for with drivers making mistakes, going off, running wide. And certainly could see that in Formula 1 as well, because these cars are sensitive to the wind.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying earlier, that it looked like that some of these turns had been affected. The cars have been affected by the wind. Like you said, they're so sensitive. So, I mean, this is Formula 1, right? The aerodynamics are king here, and a little bit of wind can make a big difference. And so this big wind can make, honestly, I'm expecting it to affect the race too. I don't see why it wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think almost more so because you don't only have to deal with the impact of the wind on your car, but then when you're in a pack, you've got the impact of another car, like their dirty air on the airflow that's hitting your car. Add the wind to that, like it can really mix it up. Where this is why when drivers say about inconsistent balance and inconsistent handling, corner to corner can be completely different, because the wind can be gusting at 1 second, then it can drop for a split second, and you get totally different handling. Then you could be in the dirty air of someone because of the direction the corner's going. Then you might not be on the next corner. It's a real challenge that I think we underappreciate sometimes, because it's an invisible one. Obviously, we don't see it out there. We don't see it on TV. You can't actually envisage what the wind is doing and how it's impacting the cars. So, it's going to be tricky. I think we're going to have a lot of complaints from drivers about those conditions later on. But also, you might get a lot of radio messages from engineers saying, "Watch out, the wind's picked up here, or it's in this direction or that direction." One thing to look out for: it is a headwind down the pit straight, which should help with overtaking, because it should mean that you actually get more of an effect from the slipstream and the DRS if you're following another car, because they're punching a nice big hole into that headwind.
Ah, interesting. Okay, that's good. All right. Hey, before we're going to get into the Max Verstappen penalty, Chris, because it's actually a little bit controversial, I think. But I want to talk about some news that happened this week. We haven't touched on this in any of our shows this weekend. And Chris, I'm going to let you talk about this, because I'm actually reading the article that you wrote on Racer.com. But Formula One has announced the Italian Grand Prix will remain at Monza until at least the 2031 season.
Yeah, it has. It's been quite interesting recently. We've seen a number of races having their contracts extended. Canada and Monaco also had the same, but those were announced in conjunction with some changes to the date that meant that they were going to swap positions effectively in the calendar, and Canada will be earlier. But Italy, with Monza being solidified, they've been investing quite a lot in their facilities. This year when we went there was a lot more improvements to the infrastructure that was much needed, really. It's a brilliant historic venue, but it did need some help because of the size of the events that it's now holding. But I think also the knock-on impact is we're expecting that might mean Imola won't have a permanent deal. There's a lot of talk about certain European races that might start alternating, might go into kind of a rotation system where potentially Imola, potentially Zandvoort at some stage. Spa was kind of mooted in this same sort of discussion. These are some venues that might be every other year or every third year to kind of create more space on the calendar for different events that could come on. And I think a lot of people will hope that actually does happen, so that it means that they're not just expanding the calendar, because it must be remembered, I don't think we've said it on air this weekend yet, but we're breaking new ground here right now, this weekend. The 23rd race of a Formula One season. We've never had a 23rd race. 22 has always been the record. We're going to end up with 24 this year, but this is the first 23rd Grand Prix of a season we've ever had.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, Greeny, I know you've been to Monza many times.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think these are important decisions being made right now. With such a long calendar, it's really important, I think, because we've got a few places that are new. Vegas has made its splash, and it's its own thing. But I don't want to lose places like Monza because of the history, because of what it means to Formula One. We've seen with Monaco, they've been up and down. They've got their extension. Again, very important places to go, because there's a lot of change going on at the top of Formula One right now. We'll get to the FIA story later. But new teams coming in. There's a lot of modernization of Formula One with Liberty's influence. And as long as they stick to a lot of the traditions that are important to Formula One, I'm happy. I don't want to see it overly changed.
Yeah, like Chris was saying, the new deal for Monaco and the change for Canada. But yeah, Monaco's the ultimate example of that, of what you're just describing, right? It's the most iconic, most storied, I guess you could say, or certainly has to be way up there. So,
and I would argue that Austin has now done enough in its short period to be, one of the classics on the calendar now, and would be a real loss if we lost it.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It must be said, when we talk about history, though, I mean, don't forget Austin has done a great job to do that since 2012. But the Monza extension is extending the venue that is the oldest on the calendar in terms of, the oldest racetrack that currently hosts a World Championship race. So that's massive history as well. And as you say, they kind of go hand in hand. You've got to have that balance. And, other new venues are paying and wanting to be part of it, because there's a history you can't actually buy. You can only build up over time. And you can be associated with, and that's where a lot of the prestige come from as well. So I think you're right. They need to make sure that they do protect some of the old classic races as best they can. But that doesn't mean they'll get a free pass either. They've got to evolve. They've got to improve. Mm-hmm. And that is something we have seen with Qatar and with Austin. If you look at the middle years and how tough that got, and then where they are at every year now, an amazing event. So I agree that I think that's one that needs protecting too. But it does show that they can't just rely on the fact that they've actually become a solid home. They have to maintain that position.
Yeah, Chris, it's funny you say about having they don't all get a pass. Monaco is the hardest one to me. The changes. How do you make changes there? But hey, guys, we got to sneak in a quick break, and we'll continue to get ready for the Qatar Grand Prix right after this. All right, let's check on YouTube. All right, we got some folks there. I can get the chat.
What time is it with you guys? We say
it's morning. 9:15 in the morning.
Yeah, 9 in the morning.
Yeah. So a decent time for the US this race.
A decent time.
Yeah, it's actually really good. TW, speaking of decent times, he's in Thailand, so no telling what time he is. He says, "Hope the Williams holds up, flying to Bangkok from Korea currently." Oh wow, he's in the air. Wow, that's cool. Mike Bowles is with us, and he missed yesterday. He said.
Was that an autocorrect, hoping the Williams holds up rather than the Wi-Fi holds up?
Let's see.
On the
I'm having trouble.
Message.
My chat is like vibrating. I can't. Google is doing something really weird.
I'll go.
Yeah, that's what it. That's exactly what it is, because that's so weird. I can't even read it very well. Mike Bowles says, "Best of Mr. Varsha." Yeah, Johnny Green got the same thing. So no, I didn't. We're not in the studio today because we're all doing it from home because none of us wanted to end up sick. Todd Dauber says, "I'm sure you discussed the stupid penalty for Max." Yes, we are going to discuss that, and that's an arguable take to have on that. Kevin Kelly said, "Is it going to be a two-stop race?"
I have the strategies in front of me.
Okay, good. We'll talk about that. Got lots of commercial spots in here. We got Sunoco, new sponsor. We'll get to read that one. We got Tire Rack coming on. Those are only on the, those are Tire Rack's only played commercials. No live reads for that. Yeah, Mike Bowles called the Vegas
I've
bug.
got YouTube up. I can read it. So.
Okay, good. I've got it. I just hit refresh and fixed it. All right, here we go. Coming back.
Hi, this is Max Verstappen, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, speaking of Max Verstappen, we're going to talk about Max Verstappen because he was on pole yesterday, but a very unusual one-place grid penalty for driving too slowly has moved him behind George Russell. And this has actually caused quite a bit of controversy, as you heard from our YouTube comments during the break there. And, to me, this is just, I don't know. The thing that bothered me the most, and I want to get your take, Chris. I want to start with you. But the thing that bothered me the most is that we had similar situations happen on Friday, and they were only reprimands for Perez and Tsunoda. But we now have a penalty for Max. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, there's key differences in this. And I'll admit, I'm just going to start this point with I've taken a gamble right now to not cross the pit lane to go on the grid, because I'm going to try and find Christian Horner while I'm waffling to see if we can get his take. And if we don't get it now, then I'll definitely get to him on the grid. But the Tsunoda and Perez incidents were just that they had been going too slowly with kind of no need for it. They could have stayed or could have been closer to the delta that you meant to stay to. And there's a reason that exists. It's to stop drivers backing up heavily at the end of a lap, like we used to see, where they'd be going very, very slowly at the end of a lap to create a gap ahead of them. And when they would do that, then you had closing speeds that could be very high, and therefore that was deemed dangerous. Now, obviously, if not everyone adheres to those rules, you're going to get those dangerous situations anyway, and everyone's going to start slowing down again and ignoring the regulations. So that's why it's there. Then you quite often find drivers get away with it when they don't meet the delta time, because they do have reasons for that. They're letting other cars go past them that are on fast laps. They're getting out of their way. And obviously that's more important than just sticking to your own delta time. So essentially, if you're just making sure that everything runs smoothly and other cars impact you, then that's okay. You don't have to quite adhere to the time in that sense. So that's why it was a reprimand for Tsunoda and Perez, because they had no real reason to be going so slowly, but they also didn't interact with anybody else. So it kind of was just in isolation. You went unnecessarily slowly. Shouldn't be doing that. Don't do it again. With Verstappen, because he and George Russell were both not on flying laps, they're saying, well, it's not like the worst impeding situation. For example, if George had been on a flying lap, it would have been a 3-place grid penalty for Verstappen, slam dunk, because he's held up another car that's on a time lap and ruined his lap. Because that wasn't the case, it was a mitigating circumstance. But because he still did influence Russell, who was trying to get round to start his own lap at the pace he wanted to be going, and Verstappen was on the racing line and Russell took evasive action to avoid him, they say, well, you did interact and get in the way of another driver, but it's with limited impact. So it needs to be more than a reprimand, because those reprimands are just for people who don't interact with another driver, don't have any impact on anybody else. But it needs to be less than a 3-place grid penalty, because neither of you are on flying laps, so you haven't actually ruined his session. But you could have, and that's the thing. If you look at Russell said that he could have damaged his floor running over the curb and into the gravel, and I've watched it back a few times. I was maybe a bit harsh on George yesterday, saying he didn't go in the gravel. I think he dipped his left rear slightly into a gravel trap doing it, but it could have damaged the floor over the curb. That is true. And that's all based on what Verstappen was doing. So that's why it kind of played out, why there was a harsher penalty. And in many ways, I think the stewards giving 1 place was them saying, look, it was not the worst thing in the world, but there's a sliding scale of punishments here, and we have to fit this one in between what we could be giving and what we've given elsewhere for lesser offences. So it's kind of balancing the two, and they found that middle ground. So they could have done 2 places. But I think if you're going to penalise, then 1 was correct. Am I fully on board with should it have been 1 at all? I'm not too sure. I think the fact that Russell could see what was happening ahead. He knew who was on a fast lap and who wasn't. He wasn't on one himself. I still feel like he has to take a lot of blame as well. But that's the reasoning behind it in a long-winded way.
Yeah, and I think it's one of impetus too, because Russell's or Mercedes' argument is he was 2 corners away from starting a flying lap. And he'd lost the impetus, therefore, because they had an interaction, and therefore that's adjudicated as well. He could have got the pole because he was about to start the flying lap. That's their argument.
Yeah. Well,
let's don't forget the gaps were tiny, weren't they? It was half a tenth of a second between Russell and Verstappen in the end. So he said maybe that's where that half a tenth was. I couldn't improve on my final lap for some reason, and that was his reasoning for why he felt it was a bigger deal than just let them play on.
Well, we've got a clip from George Russell right after qualifying yesterday. Let's hear from George Russell.
George, hello. P2, we saw the moment with Max on your final lap. How much did that impact you? Can you talk us through it from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely didn't help. When you're going through a gravel 2 corners prior to starting your lap, I think everybody improved on that last lap. I went 2 and a bit tenths slower. So, I'm still pretty pleased with P2. It was a shame how things unfolded on that last lap. But, just taking the positives, it's been 4 qualies in a row now. We've been on the front row. I'm just feeling really, really great in the car.
Showed great pace in the sprint, of course, as well. So feeling pretty confident for the race tomorrow that you can take the fight to Max and go for
definitely.
victory.
I think what's great is, in the sprint this morning, Ferrari seemed to be very similar pace to Lando and myself. So, and now obviously Red Bull and Max have turned it up a bit today. So, maybe we've got a 4-way fight on our hands, which is what it's all about.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, he didn't go into it too much at that point, but yeah, Chris, I'm with you. I still can't decide whether or not this should have been a penalty at all. And so, Greeny, I'll ask you this question. Should the fact that it's taking a pole position away, essentially, factor into it at all?
It's a good question. I mean, if they'd have been 9th and 10th, you really wouldn't have thought much of it, as it were, because it really is just a swap, and there's not a lot to be changed. But the difference on a cold track, on a dirty track, swapping positions is the difference between the clean line, the best line, and the dirty side of the track. So in this particular case, yes, it's a big advantage to have pole, and therefore that's why the penalty is, quite, in one way, quite severe.
Yeah, it's also a tough track to overtake on. So, if you do have the advantage of starting one place further up, then that could really play out a lot in your strategy. It's not like, for example, Las Vegas, where everyone says, you can definitely overtake if you have a quicker car. Much harder here with the high-speed corners. But I kind of do side on that, well, you just judge it on its merits. You've got to ignore where those drivers are in context as such. That incident, did it deserve it? That said, if you want to almost defend the stewards from looking at context, as you mentioned, it was George Russell who felt he was compromised. It was Max Verstappen doing the compromising. At that point, George Russell was provisionally on pole position. Max Verstappen wasn't. He was second. Verstappen went ahead and started his lap unhindered and happy and went quicker and took pole position. And Russell didn't get to because he felt like he didn't get the perfect preparation because he was impacted by Verstappen. That kind of, at least it was between just the two of them all the way through. And it's only the two of them that have had their grid positions changed as a result. So I do worry that because it's for pole position and it's Max and he gets penalised with fair regularity for someone at the front of the field so much and doesn't like it, then I think it's become a big talking point. Actually, as Johnny said, if this was 9th and 10th and the two of them, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. We'd have given it a quick bit of lip service and said, Max did this. This is what the steward said. Yeah, fair enough. It's only a small penalty. Let's go racing.
Yeah, I was thinking about the way Max might be reacting to this. He might be like, I've already got the championship. I don't care. Or he could say, all right, he could be upset about it. And you've got an angry, more competitive Max Verstappen in your rearview mirrors, George Russell. Is that what you want right now? So, yeah, I don't know. And I think you're right, Chris. I think we wouldn't have been talking about it. I think we would have given it 2 minutes and moved on. So I think that's why it's a big deal now. But I
have something else for us to talk about right now. Sorry, I've just, while I was looking for Christian Horner, and he's not appeared from the team hospitality, so he might still be in the garage, and I'll try and get him on the grid. I was paying attention to the reconnaissance laps with the drivers going to the grid. And Lewis Hamilton complained at Oscar Piastri getting very close to him in the pit entry. And that Piastri was at full tilt coming into the pits. Hamilton was cruising in, as was I think it was an RB ahead of him. Anyway, Piastri wanted to attack the pit entry line and really practice getting the car stopped. But the stewards have noted it. So there may be an investigation there. It's been noted for driving erratically, that Piastri essentially, by overtaking Hamilton where he did, at high speed, maybe broke the regulations a little bit at this point of the weekend. He probably would be allowed to do what he did in a race situation, but this is not a race situation. So I'll keep an eye on if there's any further investigation into that and a potential penalty, because that would be costly for McLaren if for a silly little incident like that, Piastri found himself with a time penalty in the race.
Ooh, yeah, that will be interesting to see, considering where we are in the championship and all that, with the constructors' battle still up for grabs. All right, well, let's get in another quick break, and when we come back, we've got some other things to talk about. We're going to talk about the FIA and the firing of Tim Mayer and other things that are going on. Back after these messages. Yeah, Chris, that is very interesting. I can't wait to see what's going on with that.
I'm sure,
YouTube,
sure you'll get a replay of it in a bit.
Yeah. YouTube, Todd Dauber says, thanks for the explanation, Chris. JP does a good job of telling Max where everyone is, but still thought George made more of that than necessary. Yeah, there was, what do you call that in the NBA? The flop. There was a little bit of, it looked like George was definitely playing it up, which, I would expect him to do. So not.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a bit of gamesmanship in there.
Yeah. Mike Bowles says, you world motor journalists are amazing. I work out 4 time zones in North America, and Vegas just beat me down. Yeah. Just look at what monster Medland. Props to the best F1 radio team ever, SCB. Thank you, Mike Bowles. That's very generous of you, sir.
Checks in the post.
Yes, exactly. Checks in the mail. Everybody's talking about being sick this time of year.
Oh, I'm waiting for it. I can tell you that. It's coming.
Greeny is fading, literally and physically. His chair, when he rocks back, we can almost just see his glasses. Greeny, what's for breakfast this morning?
Not really feeling it. Probably just a shake.
Well,
Yeah.
Now you know I'm ill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
now
that's worrying.
let's see what we got. We got my live read in the next segment.
I gotta get my dog out for a pee. He's looking at me forlornly.
Chris, anybody nearby?
Well, I've found Christian Horner, but he's on the pit wall, so I'm going to try and be in the right place for if he comes down from it, and walk along the pit lane with him.
Let's see what else. All right, we're coming back. That was quick.
I'm George Russell, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, welcome back. We've got a half hour to the Qatar Grand Prix coming up right here on Channel 81 on SiriusXM. But we are going to talk a little bit about the FIA because there's been quite a bit of news with Tim Mayer, an American who is now been fired from, I say fired, it's a volunteer position.
Sorry to cut you off, John, but I've managed to find a man that I was really keen to speak to ahead of this race based on what happened late last night before most people were trying to get away from the racetrack. And Max Verstappen lost pole position with a one-place grid penalty for essentially impeding a driver when neither was on a fast lap. Christian Horner, what did you make of it?
Yeah, very surprised because both cars were on slow laps. George had plenty of line of sight to see Fernando ahead had backed off. Max had, backed off. They're going, nowhere near the speeds of a racing lap. And I would ask, why was George pushing so hard in that corner? It just looked like he was making a bit of a dive for it. But it is what it is. And if we needed any more motivation, then we certainly got it.
Yeah, I mean, Max probably doesn't need it, but he does have the title wrapped up. So does this give him a bit of a carrot to go and chase today?
It's a cup final for him. So, I think he was just overjoyed that the car really delivered yesterday. Our first pole since Austria. And, he drove a blinder in qualifying. Let's see what we can do in the race.
You confident it'll be a better car in this race than the sprint?
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
There you go. I think he said a little bit of what we were saying too, about how.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good stuff, Chris.
Yeah, good job, Chris. But yeah, hey, we were going to talk about Tim Mayer. Jonathan, I know this is something that's really stuck in your craw, as they say here in Texas, about Tim Mayer being fired and everything else with Ben Salam.
Yeah, to be honest, Tim's kind of the final piece of the puzzle for me. In that I've known Tim for the best part of 20 years, and for whatever reason we just bump into each other at airports, or he does so much more than just Formula One. He's been race director at a lot of stuff, and obviously was the ironically. It looks as though the nail in the coffin was due to the situation at Qatar for him. Which was that he was representing Circuit of the Americas in the appeal for the track invasion, and it was the way it was worded that Ben Suleiman wasn't happy about, because what Tim was trying to protect, quite rightly, was U.S. law, which the situation, the $500,000 fine, implies negligence, and he wanted to rectify, as did the Circuit of the Americas, that there was no negligence. They had made proper preparations, but you could only do so much, and so that was an important part. And so Tim sort of found himself doing the right thing, but getting the ire of Ben Suleiman. Either way, he's one of the most respected guys after Charlie Whiting that the FIA has produced, and they don't just grow on trees. They've lost 10 people in the last year and it's not looking good at the FIA at all.
Ooh, Chris, what's your take?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, yeah, the take on that, the fact that Mayor spoke out was telling. I think that shows some real frustration within people that have worked there. Quite often people don't want to draw attention to the fact they've lost their job. So this shows that there's some real unrest, and we've had it from the drivers. The drivers themselves have come out and said, "Look, it's not looking good." George Russell actually is, very prominent within the Grand Prix Drivers Association, and he said there's this lack of transparency. We're asking for more transparency from the FIA about where our fines are going. How are they making money off drivers and where they're spending that money, but also he used the term who's going to be fired next. And all of that, I think, has been unsettling quite a few people in F1. Well, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, has been speaking this weekend here in Qatar, and he's basically said, mind your own business. He's told the drivers that it's none of their business what the FIA does, and that they should just focus on driving. And I really don't think that's going to go down very well at all with the drivers. I think we're going to see it's only going to stoke the flames, actually, and there's going to be an even greater divide. And what I think Ben Sulayem is underestimating is by doing that, he's pushing the drivers to side more with Formula One itself, Formula One management. And in doing that, Formula One would love control over the whole sport in a perfect world. It would love to be able to handle the regulations too. It's not able to. They are separate from the commercial rights, but it always leads to these huge fights for power. Well, it really won't help the FIA if they don't have the teams and drivers on side, if they don't have their support or their buy-in to certain things. And when the president himself is alienating the drivers, as well as so many people within the sport with the decisions he's making, that could be very damaging. So I do think this is, we're getting to almost a crisis point. And I'm not sure which way it'll go when the season ends. That might diffuse things because everything gets a bit quieter. You don't have the whole paddock together every week. Or it might mean that with no racing, it becomes an even bigger focus. So I think we're heading into a pretty crucial time, actually.
Ooh, yeah. You know what, Chris? Let me read this quote from Tim Mayer, because this is really interesting. He says the official reason that will be given is they felt there was a conflict of interest with the FIA, and I had led the rider review in my role as organizer, Mayer told the BBC. He says, but that's not why I was fired. Being an organizer is a role that I fulfilled, benefiting the FIA for over 12 years. This isn't new. He says, in spite of the matter being resolved quietly and amicably, he's, Ben Sulayem, still upset and decided to fire me. I got a text from one of his assistants. That's how he was fired, is not, over text from one of his assistants after 15 years of volunteering as a steward. That's enough right there to get, that shouldn't happen like that.
Yeah, and there's more.
Sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, there's more. There's another story. I don't want to get into it because it gets long and winded. But there is a story in the Times, at the Times of London, talking about the auditing of his money and how he spends it and how his expenses are spent. And it's rather nefarious. I don't like it. It smacks to his comments of mind your own business don't help because it's our business, how he spends the money on the fines and how he spends the money that he is allocated, especially because what it infers is that elections are coming up and he'd like to give it to the motor clubs that are electing him. So it's all a little bit nasty. And I like you say, I think there's going to be a crisis real quick.
Ooh, that's smacks of basically spending it on your own campaign, essentially, is what that sounds like.
Correct.
What do you think, Chris?
That story, I think, mentions that he potentially removed some people that were in a committee that were set up to protect against that sort of thing. So that there's a lot to play out on that. But yeah, that was a big joint byline with a very serious journalist from the Times, their chief sports writer. So I was hoping to get Zach's ground thoughts on it, but I don't know if we'll get him at the right time. I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought, so I don't know if I'm about to get jumped here by Spanish TV or not. But I'm not sure actually now's the time to speak to team bosses with 15 minutes till lights out about such complex topics. But hopefully we can get a few of them after the race on it, because it is a good talking point that has a lot of nuance to it that we really should be getting stuck into even more.
Well, and let's not forget that we lost F1 race director Niels Vidic and also F2 race director. And so there's, Jonathan, you alluded to all the 10 people, but this feels like an organization in disarray right now. I think it's,
and just to show you where it really impacts is you've lost the race director. You've brought in Rui Marquez, who was the race director in Vegas and was the race director of F3 at Macau. He used to be F2 only, or F2 and F3. This weekend, he's had to do F1, F2, and F1 Academy. Tim's obviously gone home. I pray for him that he doesn't have a major situation to sort out. He's been on the road like everybody else, has been around the world twice because, Macau's not that far from Qatar in many ways. So he's been around the world literally in a week.
Yeah, just to clarify something of that, the FIA pointed out, F1 Academy is not one of Rui Marquez's areas of jurisdiction. That's Silvia Bello that looks after that. So originally it was reported and widely accepted beforehand that he would be looking after that. And then when a question was put to one of the team bosses actually on Friday, it was clarified that no, it's only it's only Formula 2 that it's taking on in addition. But that is still a lot of work. They have 2 races in the weekend. They've got a championship, as we were talking about earlier, that's going to the wire. It all matters a heck of a lot. Anyway, speaking of championships that are going to the wire, I've got Zach Brown here with me. And Zach, we've been talking about politics and the FIA, and we want to talk about racing right now because you could win the Constructors' Championship today. How are you feeling?
We could, but we got to have a great result and keep Ferrari behind us. So I think it's going to be a tough race today. George has been quick all weekend. Max has been quick for a few years. The Ferraris are quick, so I think these kind of top 6 cars are all capable of winning, and like all Grand Prix, just want to have a good first lap and see where things settle in.
Well, you're starting alongside each other on the second row. Your 2 drivers played very well together yesterday in the sprint. So how key is teamwork going to be today?
I think very important, as well as strategy. Probably a one-stop race, fast race. Wing's not too bad tonight. Not quite as cool as last night, but let's see what happens in turn 1. I think Max is a little grumpy. He's not on pole.
Yeah, he certainly is. I spoke to Christian Horner. But just finally, just standing here knowing that you could win the Constructors' Championship, with where McLaren's come from, how special is that, Bill?
It's unbelievable, but try not to think about it. Just treat it as another race. Keep doing what we have doing to get us here instead of trying to race for a championship. Just do what we've been doing for all season, and then see where things end up.
Well, good luck today.
Thank you.
Great stuff, Chris. Nice catching up with Zach Brown there from McLaren. Hey, Chris, Zach alluded to a one-stop, but you said you got the tire strategy. I mean, do you agree with Zach Brown?
Yes, there's a reason that it's going to be a one-stop, even though a two-stop would probably be quicker, and it's because it's so hard to overtake here. It's a track position race, so you can overtake into turn 1. It's not impossible. As I mentioned, with the headwind, it will help a little bit. But the middle sector is so hard to follow, high-speed corners. So essentially, if you can make sure you're ahead of another car, you're going to likely stay there. So you want to minimise the amount of pit stops you make, because that's when things go wrong. And it's also a very long pit loss, or a large pit loss number here, because the final corner is so quick, and then the pit straight's so quick that if you slow down and come into the pits to change tyres, you lose somewhere in the region of 25 seconds. So you want to only do that once in a race if you can afford it. So probably a medium, followed by a hard stint with just one stop today.
Yeah. Chris, you probably have your microphone directly pointed at a speaker, because we can hear that directly in the background behind you there. And I know your mic is great as far as directional. So just FYI. Hey, you know what? I've got a clip here from Lewis Hamilton that I want to play, but I want to get this final little break in before we do that. So when you come back, we will hear from Lewis Hamilton about his complaints about how he's not fast anymore. You listen to Speed City, back after these messages. All right. Yeah, Chris, that was crazy. It was coming.
Sorry, they were announcing the national anthem, so it's also me trying to time it for when I had to get off talking.
Well, normally your mic is so directional. So just checking on YouTube here. Let's see what the YouTube team thinks about this FIA thing. Andy P says the MBS response, that's what happens just before you get fired. Unreal.
I just read that. Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Yeah, it is, Andy. That's good.
It's not helpful, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, if any of that is true, he says he won't make it. MBS won't make it till Australia. Yeah.
Yep. They've got to do something. I mean, there's no leadership now. I mean, there's no Charlie Whiting figure in the FIA at the moment. Ben Suleiman is just stirring up honey pots and honey nests. He's not helping anything.
Yeah.
4 in a row, Max. 4 in a row. Congratulations.
I was just listening to Chris's while we were waiting. So, Casey,
they're playing out hype videos now.
Okay. I was just telling Casey I want to play George Russell. Let me look at some of the other clips here.
You've done George, haven't you?
I mean, not Russell, Hamilton. What'd you say, Chris?
I said we've done George. Sorry, that's it.
Yeah.
How long's the Lewis clip?
Let's see. Here we go. Coming back.
Hello to everyone, this is Gunther Steiner, this is Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
At Sunoco, performance is what they do, and is one of the most legendary brands in motorsports history, sitting at the front of the pack with sponsorships across more than 40 different racing entities. They are now here to tell race fans everywhere that they have made the long-awaited return to the world of Formula One as the official sponsor of Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber. Sunoco, no one knows racing like they do. All right, welcome. We are about, 15 minutes? Not even that, 13 minutes from the start of the race. But I promise we're going to hear from Lewis Hamilton, because Lewis Hamilton has been complaining all weekend that he's just not fast anymore. And I think all of us are, I don't know, I feel like Lewis is just saying these things just because that's the way he feels right now. I don't believe it, but let's hear from Lewis.
Lewis, was that a similar experience to sprint qualifying for you? How was the car feeling out there this evening?
My car was feeling good. We made some good changes going into qualifying, and the car felt really good. Just not fast.
You put up quite a fight in the sprint, of course, earlier today. What's your feeling for the race tomorrow, the longer run?
I didn't put much of a fight. I kind of let him pass, to be honest. But he was generally quicker anyways. So, but we have improved the car, so I don't know what it's going to be like in race trim, but hopefully better.
Thanks, Lewis.
Yeah.
That's one way of putting it, isn't it? That is the reaction you have, because I don't fully buy into it that Lewis truly believes that he's slow. And he did expand later that he has full faith that he's not lost anything, but it's just been the trend. I'm stood by his car now, actually. He's not here at this moment. His team are waiting for him to come back to jump into it. But we've seen him come alive in certain races, but it just feels like he's phoning it in now a little bit, and that his eyes are on his future. Maybe understandably so. I think everyone who's been long-term in a job somewhere, then, if you say you've done 10, 15 years with the same company, and you're working the final few days of your notice before you go to a new exciting job, your head is going to start moving on to that next challenge. So maybe that's just where he's at. Right now, actually, he starts between the two Ferrari cars as well. So he's going to be racing with them. And I liked what we saw against Charles Leclerc in the sprint. I don't think he was letting him pass at all. And I think he won't be doing any such thing today with the bigger points on offer. But it just must stink, because his teammates starting on the front row, starting on pole position today. And that's what Lewis Hamilton's been used to. So it's just been an unusual scenario for him to have to handle, to have seen a teammate comfortably out-qualify him on so many occasions.
I think that's the point. It's that long 23 races. He's not had a good season. He's not going out on a high, really. He did a good job in Vegas. I think it was just a case of being honest and getting caught, not caught out, but just telling it like it is. And yeah, showing his feelings that half a second is half a second. He's been 0.4 off Russell all weekend, and now Russell's got the pole. It's not going to, it doesn't bode well for him. He wants to go out on a high on a team he built, and it's not going to happen because now they have a new team leader, and that team leader's faster than him. I think he'll find his mojo over the winter when he goes to Ferrari in the challenge of Leclerc. So I think look at this as a pocket of time rather than a long-term thing.
I hope you're right. I hope he just does a great job at Ferrari. And honestly, that's what I expect. But hey, guys, we don't have Mr. Varsha, so I'm just going to run down the grid, not in full Varsha fashion, but I'm just going to run down and let everybody know where we are because we are about 10 minutes out from the race. So we now have a new grid because of Max Verstappen no longer on the pole because of that. So now you got George Russell out front, Max Verstappen joining him on the front row, followed by Norris and Piastri, the two McLarens, who are trying to win the championship today, followed by a Ferrari, which is trying to also win the championship, but not today, but prevent McLaren from winning. So Leclerc in fifth, and then Lewis Hamilton, we just heard from in sixth position, and then followed by Carlos Sainz in the other Ferrari, and Fernando Alonso looking good in P8. And Checo Perez, who made it to Q3, which was honestly a little bit surprising, the other Red Bull car in ninth. Kevin Magnussen, who Chris caught up with yesterday, we got to hear from him. He sounded pretty happy about his finishing where he did in 10th. And then followed by Pierre Gasly, Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas. The two, Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas, the two Saubers, have looked a little bit quicker of late. And stepping back to that Gasly position, that's an important position because Magnussen and Gasly side by side fighting for that P6 in the Constructors' Championship. And then down in 14th, Yuki Tsunoda in the RB, the other team that's battling for that sixth position. Lance Stroll in 15th, Alex Albon 16th, Liam Lawson down in 17th, Nico Hulkenberg, who had a rough qualifying, he had a mistake there, so down in 18th, a little bit unusual for him, out of position. And Franco Colapinto in the Williams and the other Williams, and then Esteban Ocon, who has not taken advantage of the quick car that Alpine has had since his podium finish in Brazil. But Johnny Green, any comments, any thoughts from running down the grid there besides that the battles we've got for the Constructors' Championships?
I'll definitely be keeping a close eye on the place for sixth place. Obviously, Magnussen's up there. Hulkenberg isn't. Lawson and Tsunoda, lots of work to do, as does Gasly and Ocon. So I'll be keeping an eye on that as well as the championship fight because, basically no one's really stepped up to take control. Hulkenberg got those two valuable points in the sprint race, but the game is on, 6 points between them.
Hey, Chris, I hear lots of activity. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's just all of us getting filtered through a tunnel off the grids and through the pit lane to back to the paddock after that. But I want to pick up something you said. I was going to do it off the back of that Sunoco ad, actually, but good timing for them to be talking about Stake Sauber because there has been a really good performance from that team this weekend, yet to score a single point. But Valtteri Bottas was actually disappointed with his qualifying. He felt that he was fighting for Q3, and in the end, it was Zhou Guanyu who got the better of him. But they're both there on row 6 and 7, where they're actually just outside the points, a little instant ahead of them. They could certainly pick some up because they're quick enough to stay there. They're there on merit. They didn't luck into that qualifying position. This track suits this car, or the Sauber car, because last year they scored double points here. And that's the last time they scored points. So the 400 days since Sauber, Stake, Alfa Romeo as it was, future Audi team. Can't wait till it's just called Audi. It's going to be much easier. But yeah, that's how long it's been since they scored. So a big opportunity for them to do it today. And similarly, you mentioned Nico Hulkenberg being out of position. I saw Hulkenberg and Magnussen having a chat on the grid, actually, as they were heading back towards their cars. Hulkenberg was waiting around to talk to Magnussen by his car. At first, I thought it was quite funny. It was Hulkenberg just assuming it was his because it was in a top 10. But he wanted to obviously discuss something. to do with something he's felt on the way to the grid or race strategy, whatever it may be. But I know that Aston Martin, starting 8th with Fernando Alonso, they're worried about the Haas. They think Kevin Magnussen's going to be a real threat to them today because of the pace that Hülkenberg showed in the sprint yesterday. They said it's remarkably quick how quick the Haas was in race trim here. And, don't forget, Max Verstappen didn't get past Hülkenberg in the sprint. He couldn't really put pressure on him. So, there are a few that I'm going to be watching out for.
Yeah, that's such a good story, the momentum that Haas has had. I mean, I know it's gotten interrupted a little bit. They didn't have, some of the races in between, like Vegas and stuff. But, man, that's such good momentum they've got right now. And, I can easily see Magnussen giving everybody in there a hard time. And, of course, you've got Alonso in 8th, Magnussen in 10th, with Checo Perez in 9th, right in between them. So we'll see how he does with that, that quick Red Bull car. But, Chris, I did see a photograph that was floating around on social media. That was apparently from this morning with Checo Perez, Helmut Marko, and Christian Horner all having a meeting, and there was no smiles on any of those faces. Did you happen to see that?
I haven't seen that photo, but I've seen that discussion happen a million times. It must be said that the form Perez has been in quite often leads to some pretty stirred discussions there. And look, Christian Horner, to his credit, quite often lends quite a listening ear to Checo. He goes and says, tell me what went on. Let's talk about things. But I think that relationship's been deteriorating. What was a very strong, positive one, I think even Horner's thinking now, Checo needs to do something special to keep his seat. And it would not surprise me if some of those discussions were about the future. But as we heard from Helmut Marko himself, actually, didn't we, in Las Vegas on our post-race show, that there's going to be a shareholder meeting from the Red Bull shareholders after Abu Dhabi. So we're talking just over a week's time now, where Marko and Horner and Red Bull Racing will present options for the driver lineup moving forwards and let the shareholders make a call, because it's going to be expensive if they want to change Sergio Perez. But it's not out of the question, even though he's still got another 2 years to run on his deal.
Don't you find it ironic, though, that Helmut Marko, Corner, and everybody have been talking about the driver lineup all season long, and then when push comes to shove, then they go, but we'll talk to the shareholders.
A little bit. Yeah. I think it's, they kind of have full control of what they want to do in general. I think they've got a contract there that just means it costs a lot of money that they'll have to pay Sergio Perez unless Perez were to walk away, which, why would you? You've signed a great deal. Let the team pay you off or make the decisions they need to make. But the shareholders will be asking why so many millions were spent less than a year after signing someone for an extra 2 years if you were to make that call. So I think they're kind of just trying to almost get the rubber stamping if they do want to make a change. Or they might even publicly come back out and say, we're told we're not allowed to make a change. Because in a sense, it could get that messy. From what I'm hearing, there's moves to say to Perez, look, do it the easy way or the hard way here. So, he's last chance saloon, if that even counts now. I don't know if he can do anything. Aside from winning today's race with a remarkable performance, I just wonder if the writing's on the wall.
All right, guys, we just got a couple minutes left. I want to get our predictions in. But, man, we got some potential spicy stuff going on here. Look, we got Carlos Sainz. We were talking about Lewis Hamilton being at the end of his, time with Mercedes. Well, Carlos Sainz has got the same thing going on with Ferrari, and he's down in 7th, and they're battling for the Constructors' Championship. So we got that going on. We got both McLaren in 3rd and 4th. But let's do our predictions. Johnny Green, you want to give us a start with yours?
Yes, I am going to say Norris for the win, Hamilton in 2nd, and Russell 3rd.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll give mine since I typically go last. I'll give Chris the last shot at it. I'm going to say Russell for the win, and Verstappen and Leclerc. How about that? All right, Chris Medland?
You very nearly went with what I was thinking, which is actually, and I don't expect this race to be boring, but was the positions they start in. So Russell, Verstappen, Norris. But I'm intrigued to see if that might actually be Russell, Norris, Verstappen, depending on how well that Red Bull holds up in terms of its race performance compared to the sprint. But I think if Russell gets away in the lead, he's going to go and win this race. I think the car's good enough.
So if that's a Russell, Norris, Verstappen, you didn't fully commit, Mr. Medland.
All right, Russell Norris Verstappen, go for that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Chris Medland, Jonathan Green. Get well, Bob Varsha, and stay tuned right here on Channel 81 because we got the race coming up, and we'll talk to you right after the race with our post show.